Good evening, everyone. My name is Sue Fager. I am the Transition to Adulthood Project Coordinator for Pacer Center. I am also a sibling, and we have had some housing journeys of our own. So I know the path many of you are walking on. I will let my colleague Jerry introduce himself. And Jerry, I was trying to think before we started tonight, how many years you and Pacer have done this training on housing for families.
Yeah, close to 10 years, I think. A
Okay.
long time. Jamie would probably know the answer, but it's been a long time, and I've really enjoyed the relationship and the collaboration. It's good for our county. It's good for hopefully the people attending to get the information out. So I have
Okay, would
another
you like
opportunity
to
tonight.
say a little bit more, Jerry,
Sure,
about what you
sure.
do?
I'm Jerry Mellum. I'm a senior planning analyst with Hennepin County. I've been in that position for about 30 years. It's a role that I really enjoy because I get to work with people directly, telling them about county services, housing, in addition to vocational services and consumer directed services as well. We have a lot of informational sessions that are available as well. That some are YouTube videos, some are in person at libraries. So I'm happy to be here tonight to present.
Wonderful. Jamie, we're ready for the next slide. Welcome, everyone. So just a word about Pacer Center for folks who aren't familiar with who we are. We are Minnesota's Parent Training and Information Center. We provide information, training, advocacy support to parents of young adults whose young people are accessing special education or who have completed their transition services and have moved along into the world of adult service providers. As the slide says, and I think this is really important, we are the only organization in Minnesota that provides that support for families with children and young adults who have any disability. Jamie, next. So what we're going to talk about tonight is, as you can see on this slide, we're going to talk about why transition planning and planning for housing go together, the role of person-centered, person-directed planning in guiding the housing planning process. We're going to spend some time also looking at housing options, and we are going to finish up tonight with some stories of how young adults and their families have used funding, supports, and services to secure their vision of housing. And Jerry, just a reminder that we have, I'm sure, folks from Minnesota and folks from across the country. And so most of the information we're providing tonight will be specific to Minnesota, but some of the information is relevant across the country. And we have included some resources at the end of the presentation where all of our resources are, with resources at the national level. We've also included links to 4 of our most popular housing resources. The illustration is from our Navigating the Housing and Services Process, and our 3 presentations will follow along with this navigation support pretty closely. And my final reminder is that it is our intention to provide information that is at the introductory level to help families for whom this whole notion of housing and person-centered planning and independent living is kind of a new idea. And so we want to give you some information and tools and introduce some new vocabulary to you to support you and your young adults on your housing journeys. Jamie. So why do housing planning during the transition years? The IEP team must consider independent living as part of the transition IEP process. And this is a wonderful time for you and your student who are the experts about their gifts, strengths, and preferences to incorporate that knowledge into transition planning. For Minnesota, and I'm going to guess probably for very many other states, housing options and supports involve eligibility criteria, timelines, and waiting lists. And there is also a limited availability of both affordable housing and support staff. So use the time. We recommend that families and young adults use the time in high school to begin thinking about, well, what is it? What are my hopes and dreams? And what are my visions for housing? And who are the service providers in my community who can help me with my goals and visions for housing? Jamie? Jerry, I think you're up.
Okay. I'll put on my glasses and we'll be all set to go. So housing isn't just a place to live, as you know, and just like work isn't only a place to get money for rent. Housing is more than that. When you're controlling your own house, the Department of Human Services has called it your own home. It's just a way to talk about a place where you want to live. Living in your own home is a choice versus living with others or living with your parents. Living in your own home is one person at a time. I really want to stress that. We have a lot of people on tonight, and I wish I could speak with everybody individually about their situation because there's not one road, there's not one option, there's not one answer because it's where you want to live and what kind of supports do you have in place and need. What's your situation? What's your history? It's certainly a process. The process can be longer. Sometimes the process can be quick. If you have an idea of who your housemates would be, you've really made the process a lot quicker because that takes the longest, if anything, is to find housemates. If you haven't found housemates, might take a little longer because you have to look at your communities, look at your religious centers, look at your family, your friends, schools, whatever, to try and maybe find people that you might want to live with or not live with. It's collaboration. We're collaborating with Pacer tonight because Pacer can draw a large audience, and it's collaboration with all the housing providers because the housing providers can access the funding available for staff supports. It's collaboration with the landlords that have the spaces available in apartments. It's even collaboration with the builders as new parents have found out, or parents of younger children have started to advocate that some of the apartments or the housing available in new buildings be income-based and not just considering senior housing, but also considering housing for people with disabilities. It's the right supports at the right time. There's kind of an urban legend or urban story. Some people have said they've lived in a group home and they said, what's your goal next year? And they say, I want to move out. I want to be on my own with supports. And the answer is, well, Jerry, you haven't learned to make macaroni and cheese yet. I just don't know if that's going to be okay. That's part of the deal here. Before you move out, you have to learn how to make macaroni and cheese and try as I could. I either had too much cheese in or not enough cheese or did something wrong. And so I was staying in the group home. The right supports at the right time means I can learn anywhere. I can learn in my new setting. I can learn in my apartment. I can learn in my community residential setting, group home, as long as the right supports are in place. So as a county staff person, I really try to stress that as much as possible to go on an edge a little bit and explore and make sure that the right supports are in place. Some of the words we use when we talk about your own home historically haven't been as nice and supportive and kind as we might have liked. So it's not a program, it's not a slot, it's not an open bed, it's not a placement perhaps, it's not a model, it's not a development. because it's one person at a time, looking at what you want to do, how you want to be supported. Maybe you'll bring along family and friends as well, and that's okay. But we're really looking at your situation also. And we also like to stress a lot about being independent. It's really good to be independent, but culturally and in our family, I'm interdependent. You know, I'm a social worker, so my skills are not mechanical. So when my car breaks down, I call my brother, who is a mechanical engineer who likes to take things apart and likes to fix things. I tell him a lot that I mention him in trainings I have and kind of joke about our relationship. Um, but there's an independence and an interdependence relationship with him because he would help me to let me know why my car's making a funny noise or where to take my car to get it fixed. I'm hoping that he's going to ask me to take his car over to his house and he's going to fix it for me. And likewise, as a case manager, as a social worker, as a planner, if my immediate family, mom and dad, aunts and uncles, etc., needed care and supports, I would know those resources that I could help my brother find those resources for them or help him find the resources for him. So there's interdependence. And I think that is a goal. So a person's own home is choice. One person at a time, a process collaboration. But historically, we've called it beds and slots and placements. We want to try and get away from that if we can. So next slide, please. We're going to give you a lot of ideas. You're going to learn eventually a lot about me because I've got some personal stories intertwined in the presentation. And these are some of the experiences I've had with families through my 30 years. These are some of the experiences of how they got housing. So I think it's helpful to start off with, well, what are we talking about? What is housing for people with disabilities? It's not one thing. It's not a group home. It's many things. So first on the list is a group home. We currently call them community residential settings, or CRSs. We like to initialize everything. So we're talking about it being a CRS. Think about a mother-in-law apartment. I had a person I worked with, and they had a larger house. And in the basement, they had an additional space with a locking door, and their daughter had that space where there were 2 bedrooms within it, and she could go and lock the door and say, Mom and Dad, I'm going to my house. I'm going home. She'd go home, lock the door, and she would be safe inside. Because she had space, she could have a live-in caregiver if she wanted to. She could have a housemate. She could have a significant other. She had a lot of options there, but she was also physically in the family home. But she had more independence because she was in her own space as well. Sometimes looking at a duplex in a neighborhood that you like to live in, that's close to where you work, that's close to your church, that's close to a grocery store, that has good transportation. Those are all important things. So in a duplex, you could rent it, you could own it. If you owned it, maybe one side could generate the income by renting to a community member. Maybe the parents would live on one side, maybe relatives would live on one side. Maybe an older couple could live on one side, and then the person that needs support could live on the other side. And so it's just a way to make things happen by having income maybe generated on one side, and then the person's paying the rent on the other side with some financial supports we're going to talk about in a little bit. We could go a step further and talk about a fourplex, or could talk about scattered apartments or scattered apartments within one building. So with a fourplex, maybe one of those 4 apartments would be for people with disabilities, and maybe another apartment would be for seniors, another apartment would be for the general public, another apartment could be for relatives, and they kind of have a community there where it's small and they're supporting each other, or maybe they don't really have that relationship as well. Sometimes parents come to me in groups, and so there was a group of maybe 10 people that came to me and they said, we want our children all to live in the same house. They've been friends for a lifetime. That's what we want. Well, sometimes, well, all the time, the waiver, home and community-based waiver in Minnesota has size and setting rules. And some of those rules, if you're living in a licensed setting, are 4 people or less. Sometimes 5, but most of the time it's 4 people or less. Or if you're in a large building, a large apartment building, they prefer to have maybe 25% of that building house people with disabilities receiving waivered services, and maybe not more than that, so they're not creating an institutional setting or something like that. And so maybe in a large apartment building with hundreds or many, you would ask the management or work with a new building and maybe take a few of those, 5 or 6 of those, and make a smaller community within the bigger community. I've seen situations where people have remodeled the garage. They put really nice shutters on the windows. They've made a fancy entrance door, and that garage is just feet away from the relative, from the brother, from the sister. But inside, it's a one-bedroom house, and it looks really great inside, but they're physically located really, really close. With some elderly folks now, there's these mother-in-law apartments that are in the backyard that might be options too to consider. A neighborhood housing group and co-housing. Sometimes instead of an apartment building with apartments within that building, you could look at condominiums in the neighborhood. I have a good friend, her name is Indu. She just did 2 conferences last weekend and the weekend before that I presented at, and she has 2 children with autism. Indu worked at Target for a long time and she retired, and she retired with friends of hers as well. And she bought 2 condominiums, one for each of her children. And the people that she retired with from Target also bought a condominium in the neighborhood of Plymouth. And after that, people kind of found out that she was developing a housing program. And so additional people that heard about her program bought condominiums in the neighborhood. And I think there might be 5 or 6 of them right now. So they make a concerted effort at noon to have lunch together as one group. And then some of the apartments have a theme during the day for programs and services. It might be occupational therapy, it might be physical therapy, it might be work oriented, just different themes. Indu is super creative. She's above a lot of us basically, and she bought a motorhome. And the motorhome is in the garage in one of the buildings, and the motorhome is used programmatically as an incentive as to help people move in a certain positive direction. And it was also used during COVID to go out to the malls and other places and then come back to a familiar environment where they could clean up and wash their hands and go back home again. It's just a creative option. She bought it out of her own money. It wasn't something that's funded through the county or anything like that, but just a creative option. 10, maybe 15 years ago, I was part of a demonstration and we helped 10 people buy their own home. We worked with an organization in Minneapolis called PRG Incorporated. Their website is prgincorporated.org. They do home stretch trainings, which are 8 and 9 hour trainings to teach people about how to buy a house and what all the processes are, about getting an estimate, about getting a loan, those types of things. They have housing counselors that would work with the people that we had individually. And after a period of time, they would look and see when they could make an offer based on their credit rating or based on the money they had saved up. They had relationships with banks as well. Thanks for posting that, Jamie. They had relationship with banks as well, so they could tell us even if people were non-traditional and used Sharia law, there was actually a bank in the metro area that use Sharia law lending, as well as other traditional banks like Wells Fargo or whatever. But we wouldn't just go to the bank and knock on the door and say, we're looking to buy a house. We'd go and talk to the person we were introduced to. Maybe we'll call her Sally. And Sally knew that Hennepin County was working with them. And Sally knew that they came from PRG. And Sally knew that PRG had vetted their credit. And it was pretty easy to get a letter of credit once that happened. And then from that, working with a real estate agent, getting a plot map of houses in a geographic area that were within that person's income. There's first-time home buyer money available through many of the cities. Plymouth has a good first-time home buyer program. In Minnesota, Minnesota Housing Finance Agency has first-time home buyer money as well. And so people with disabilities, if they have a good credit rating, could work towards that goal. There's a lot to talk about that, but I just wanted to mention that as well. In Minnesota, we're going through a process with our home and community-based waiver service that the state is realigning how we manage these services, and that process is called Waiver Reimagined. And as an outcome of that process, we have some new services that were introduced. And one of those services is called Integrated Community Support. Integrated Community Support is a service where a provider owns an apartment building or controls an apartment building by renting an apartment within that. They certify the building, and once it's certified, they're the only provider that can provide support services through this service, Integrated Community Support. Integrated Community Support is about teaching life skills. So it's how many hours a day would you be teaching cooking, cleaning, transportation. It wouldn't necessarily be 24. It's hard to teach 24 hours a day, but it could be a significant hour. And then there's some nice checks and balances in that even though I'm not being served that hour, I know that staff are in the building if I needed something. Integrated Community Support is a new service that we're learning a lot about, and we have to talk to you more about that as well. So those are some ideas of what some options we have. So we're going to try and hold our questions if we could, and just try and get through the material. But if you have a really burning question, I'm kind of light, and I might let you ask a question. I'm not sure. Next slide, please. When I'm working with people, we're going to learn about tools to support the match between the person and their vision of home. When I'm working with people, I've discovered 3 questions that I ask them, and this really cuts to the chase, I found, and I really find it helpful. The first question is, and I'm not even kidding, I say, where do you want to live? Where do you want to live? And it used to be when I was talking to people about where you want to live, I'd cross my fingers behind my back, and I didn't really mean it because the time was where we only had license options and you only could live where there was an opening. And I knew that on the hill, there was a house with a great picket fence. It looked really great that had an opening. And I felt that eventually they'd probably live there, but I asked the question, where do you want to live? Now there are so many housing options that people can work towards and talk about and plan for that I really mean, where would you like to live? And we try and make it happen. So we can't live places for free. They don't just appear like magic. We have to pay for them. And so I say, well, how will you afford rent and food? So people tell me some of the ways that they would afford rented food. Maybe they have Social Security. Maybe they have retirement disabilities, RSDI. Maybe they have a job. Maybe they have a trust. Maybe they have an ABLE account. It's hard to say. And then I tell them, once they tell me what resources they have, I can tell them, and I'll tell you tonight, some resources that we have to pay for rent and food as well. And then I say, well, how will you support this? How will you afford the staff support necessary? Because even if we don't have paid staff, those natural supports are helpful. And there's lots of options through paid support. So how would you afford staff support necessary? And they tell me that maybe the person and their brother have a great relationship and they'll be spending a lot of time together. Or they tell me that they have the home and community-based waiver, or they have a new service that was introduced in October called Community First Services and Support, CFSS, which replaces personal care attendant services and can be self-directed. So there's some choices there for how we can afford staff support necessary as well. This conversation is helpful because it's a beginning, it's a start. Where I'm learning from you and people are learning about what resources might be available that they could apply to their situation. All right, next slide, please. Person-centered practices and principles. Why are we talking about person-centered practices? I thought we were talking about housing. What is Sue doing here? I just don't know. No, person-centered practices and person-centered planning is a first step to find out that question, where do you want to live? And how kind of supports you need and how will you afford food? In order to answer those questions, we need some planning. We need to find out what's important to the person. What's important to the person? Do they want to live near their church? Do they want to live near the grocery store? Do they want to live near their friend? Do they want to live in the country? Do they want to live near a lake? What's important to that person? And what's that balance? Because we can't all live by the lake, right? We all want to live by Lake Minnetonka in a large mansion looking over all the boats that go by, but we have to live in different places. My vision has been to live on the 40th floor of a spanning condominium in downtown Minneapolis with a really big balcony looking over downtown. But I, for years and years and years, lived in New Hope in a nice 2-bedroom with a garage, and that was fine. It met my needs. And when I wanted to, I'd go downtown and hang out. So we find a balance between what people want and need in their life and other aspects of their life. What we talk about clearly reflects the wishes, the culture, the ethnicity, the expectations, the hopes, the strengths, the resources, and the need for support. So there's a lot to talk about. There's a whole 2-hour training about culture and how my culture might be different than your culture. And my experiences in lifetime is different than your experience. And my expectations are different than yours. And so this is your home. So we want to get as close as we can to what your wishes are, your culture, the expectations and hopes and dreams that you have. We want to talk about the additional resources related to your preferences and outcomes so you can meet that goal. Did you know that there is energy assistance that you can apply for in May for the fall and winter so you don't have to pay as much for heat in the fall and winter? That's a resource that we might talk about during a person-centered planning process. Somebody on your team might bring that up. The person who is the focus of the plan maintains control of the plan and the information included. That's really, really important. That's a basic principle. With public schools, it's so common to have one person and the parent and 14 professionals around a table. And who has the strongest message? Often it's the professionals. And so we have to really focus on ways that the person can be in control of the meetings and control of their plan. There's some tools to do that we can talk more about. As simple as talking about what's working, what's not working, what's working for the person, what's working for the parent, what's working for the provider, what's not working for the person, what's not working for the parent, and what's not working for the provider. These are all things. In Minnesota, we have a driving force. We have a vision for people with disabilities, with mental health, and older Minnesotans to live, learn, and work and enjoy life in the most integrated setting. That's not from an advocate's message. That's the Department of Human Services. It's refreshing to know that that message comes from the Department of Human Services as well. So those are some reasons for person-centered practices and principles. Next slide, please. So it's more than a house. Self-determination and person-centered thinking. We talk about a lot of things. We talk about meaningful activities. It's not just enough to have a place to live and sit and watch the wall. You have to be engaged in meaningful activities, meaningful routines. We talk about sometimes what's your morning routine, what's your work routine, and we try and duplicate that as much as possible. With new providers, sometimes they've had person-centered planning training as well. And so and you call them and you say, do you have any openings in your group home? Do you have any openings in your program? And they say, well, what's your vision? They say, well, what's your morning routine? Let's see if there's a good match between you and some of the other housemates, if they're morning people or not so early morning people. It's the support services and the flexibility of the support services. The future stability. Is this a place that I can plan to live for a long time, 10 years or more? Understanding that sometimes housing does evolve. When I lived in the cities, I moved many times for different reasons. I just didn't live in one spot and expect to be there forever. And so consider future stability issues. If that's something you're comfortable with, or have a goal that I'm going to live here for 5 years or 10 years, and then try and make that happen. Health is really important. Getting your needs, getting your needs met is really important. Getting your meds administered appropriately. So making sure that the support services are in place that can support your health as well. Is this a program that is responsible for food, And are they going to cook healthy meals? What is their routine? How do they purchase food? Can I go along and purchase food that I really like as well, or are they going to purchase food and decide what my menu is going to be? Employment, is this a place that I can live near my job? Do I want to volunteer and have meaningful activity? I've volunteered all my 30 years with 3 people with disabilities. We're going to talk about one of those folks tonight because I couldn't throw all the starfish back in the ocean, but I could help and assist 3 people, and it was very meaningful. And it also helped me to learn more about how people were experiencing services in the county, and then I could tell other people as well. And then finally, um, natural supports. So we have paid supports and natural supports. I mentioned my brother earlier. He's a natural support. I help him. He helps me. What other natural supports are available? We're going to talk a little bit about a guy named Brian, and he had some natural supports that I'll tell you in a little bit. It's kind of a fun story. All right, next slide, please. We have tools that are available. The Disability Hub, the Department of Human Services has a resource. If you just Google Disability Hub, the general hub will come up, and you can look at this resource, which talks about person-centered. What does person-centered mean for me? And there's a lot of great information. There's a link when they send this presentation out. You can click on the link and complete this workbook and help you complete some of the planning. It says, I'm in charge of my life choices and meetings. I decide what's important to me. You could help me know what's important for me. I can choose who helps me. It's okay to say what I really think and how I really feel. I can change my mind. So just like you and I can change my mind, people that we support can change their mind as well. These aren't new ideas. You and I have felt this way for a long time. I think maybe the freshness of it is supporting the general population as well, that everybody feels that way, that they can change their mind and they could work towards something. Charting the Life Course is a great resource as well. It's so rich with information. One idea they have is drawing a line, a 45-degree angle. If you drew a line at a 45-degree angle, if you put your life on that, you would say you were born in this date, you went to high school at this date, you graduated from college at this date, you got married on this date, you had children on this date, you had a job there. And so that's my life, that's maybe your life. And then we plot the same course, 45-degree angle, for people with disabilities, and whenever it falls off of that traditional life course, we talk about, well, how could we keep them on the same life course that you and I had? What happened? So they were born on a certain date, and they went to school like I did, but they went to special education, which was different. So they had different experiences than I might have had. They graduated from high school, but then they went to a transition program versus going to maybe a vocational college or something, and maybe they didn't get married. And so, what are some things that influence their life, and how could we keep them on a track that was similar to most people in meeting their goals and objectives? So very much a summary of that idea. It's much more richer than that. I encourage you to check out Charting the Life Course and check out the resources from the Disability Hub in your journey on person-centered planning. Great.
Gary?
Do you have anything to add, Sue? Please step up.
Not to add, but we've had a couple questions, and
Okay.
I feel like it's important to answer these questions now. And we've heard from a couple of folks who want to know, so if the young person I'm supporting, the young adult I'm supporting has really significant support needs, how do we do person-centered planning?
Sure. The same way you do guardianship and supported decision making, basically, with a team of, you get a team of people around that cares about, loves the person, knows the person because they've had time with them, they know them because they've had a relationship with them, and you suggest things that might be in their best interest. You suggest things that are helpful and meaningful based on what you've observed about their life as well. There's ways to do that, kind of as an advocate, as a mentor, kind of a relationship. I don't know if that addresses a question, but I know that people come in all shapes and sizes and need all kinds of different supports. But in guardianship, which is kind of taking rights away, you're looking at contracts, how deciding where you're going to live, medical things like that. A best practice now is supported decision making, and supported decision making says that I'm going to give you all the information that I can to help you make a choice or make a decision. It also says I'm going to make a decision in the best interest of you as I know you really, really well. So I would use those kinds of ideas to move ahead with a person-centered plan. Having those people that love and care about the person is really helpful to be on the team when you're planning. Is there another question? No, that was it. Okay, great. Next slide, please. So like I said earlier, it's getting kind of scary now because you're going to learn a lot more about me as I share more information. So I am a certified person-centered thinking trainer. I've trained lots of people through Hennepin County, often their new staff or contracted case managers, in a 2-day training. This is a one-page description, and this description has 3 things which are common with most one-page descriptions. One is kind of an uncomfortable area to talk about. It's what people like and admire about me. And so we don't go down the street and wear t-shirts and talk about that a lot. We're always really discreet about that. But for people that we support, often we don't hear a lot about that. And so we're going to put it right out there and say, what do people like and admire about me? And in this one-page description, it's a way to show the person in a different light versus receiving services. Maybe they're engaged in something. So I'm sitting in a creek in Alaska because my nephew lives in Alaska and I have to go to Alaska all the time to visit him, which is just, no, it's not bad at all. It's really a great thing. And so some things that I enjoy are being outdoors. And so it shows me outdoors. I'm also an organist in a small little tiny church in my hometown. I was kind of compelled to be an organist when I was 14 because there was no one else. And we kind of worked through that journey to kind of get to that. I live on a farm in southern Minnesota. I'm actually speaking from that farm. And so I have a garden in the summer and I like doing that. That's the way I can balance what's important to me and for me. I love to help people, but I also like to have some time in nature and do things myself. My mom is pictured on the left side. She passed away December 6th last year, but she lived to be 101 years old, and her cousins took her fishing every single year. So a lot of my life was around supporting her to live at home on the farm and not be in a nursing home or not be in a care facility. So the 3 questions we ask in the one-page description are what people like and admire about the person, how to best support the person, and what's important to the person. And we try and put pictures on that are meaningful and describe the person. And why would we do that? It helps us to introduce the person in a positive manner. It helps us when we are interviewing housing providers or support staff to say, look, this is who I'm supporting and who I care about. Do you think it's a good match with your agency? They really like professional wrestling. They really like gardening. If you're looking for a housemate or roommate, it's another way to project yourself, to show yourself in a positive light and find a roommate. It can be a way to show family members and friends what you're doing, how you've progressed. Maybe they haven't seen your one-page description for a long time and they go, wow, you're really doing that now. That's so great. You've learned these new skills. Now you're playing guitar. You didn't play guitar before. It's a way for case managers maybe to put the one-page description on the top of the file so they see the person in a positive manner before they dig into all the goals and objectives. In Ohio, all of the social services plans have a one-page description on top of them. In Great Britain, all the medical records have a one-page description on top of them. And so they're used in different ways internationally as far and as well as Minnesota. So some of the medical providers might put a summary of the person on top. So if I was blind and I went to the doctor, I might have a one-page description sent to the doctor that said, "This is Jeff, and Jeff is blind, and he's going to introduce himself by maybe feeling the area, checking out his environment, maybe touching your face to see who you are." And so you're aware of that, so you're prepared when he comes to your office. So there's all kinds of ways that you could capture what's important to the person, what's important for the person, how they want to be supported, and what people like and admire about the person. In past trainings, we've encouraged people to develop a one-page description for their loved one and to bring it to the next meeting. And so if you wanted to do that, that could be helpful, but it's just another process in the person-centered planning and thinking kind of goals that we have. All right, next slide, please. So some more tools to explore housing options. Some of these, It's My Choice is a place on my own checklist. We're encouraged as Hennepin County or case managers in general to use It's My Choice when people are moving from one place to another. It's a workbook. We're encouraged to fill it out. It has some basic questions about the person's preferences for housing, what their visions are for housing as well. And so check out It's My Choice if you're considering housing, if you're considering moving and putting supports in place. There's a great website, www.hb101. It'll come up and you want to click on Minnesota. There's some interactive tools that talk about housing supports and services. Many of the services and supports we're going to talk about tonight are also explained in Housing Benefits 101. There's something called the Vault, and the Vault is a place on the website you can store financial information and your personal records. And if you were in the library, you could open the website and that information would be in the Vault on the website. If you went to another computer that wasn't a part of the library system at all, you could go to Housing Benefits 101 .org. I'm so happy that you're putting the website in there. Thank you, Jamie. And that same information will be available. And you can share it with other people, family members, or people that care about you. If you want to have a discussion, and if you want to talk to the state of Minnesota Disability Hub, they would have access to that information too. So they could have it on their system, or they could have it on the website as well. Housing Benefits 101 has a section called Partners, and some of the trainings that the Department of Human Services has done within the last 5 years are housed there. And so if you wanted to learn about expunging your record, you had a bad rental record, you can learn about how to expunge that. What if I don't have enough money to pay for a deposit? They talk about that. What if I do have a history of having a criminal record, but it's been 10 years ago? What can I do about that? Some of those trainings were offered through the Department of Human Services and are housed on that website as well. The ARC Minnesota has a resource called Get Set, interest mapping tool. And so it's helpful to find out what people's interests are and preferences for things as well. So I encourage you to check out It's My Choice, Housing Benefits 101, and the ARC Minnesota's Get Set tool, which are all linked in this slide. Okay, next, please. This is where I'm going to tell Brian's story a little bit. Look at the graphic. There's a person in the middle, and look at it, looks like a spider web of connections, and they're interconnected. They're friends of friends, and they might be related, but they're also friends. There are just so many connections. So natural supports are really great. Brian is a person you're going to learn more about. He's one of the examples of people that I volunteered with for over 20 years. Brian has a brain injury. He's pretty independent though. And he lived in a typical apartment in St. Louis Park for a long time, and he was paying typical rent amounts, 800 some dollars at that time, several years ago. Was using most of his income, and we found ways to help him out. So in Brian's situation, there was a courtyard of chairs. And at night, the guys in the building would get together and sit around the courtyard chairs. And in the summer, they'd start a little campfire and they would talk to each other about whatever. Guys talk about sports or the weather, whatever. Um, and I was driving by one day and I saw Brian's chair there. Nobody asked him to put a chair there. I was really surprised to see it. But the guys found out, they got to know Brian and found out that he was actually a fourth degree black belt in Taekwondo. Brian has been studying Taekwondo for 28 years. He was an instructor for white and yellow belts, and he was very experienced. And so all of a sudden, since these guys found out that he was a fourth degree black belt, he gained a lot of natural supports overnight, basically. So instead of meeting in the circle, some of the guys would come over and he would teach him some moves or some defense moves or give him some history or something like that. And so he developed a lot of natural relationships just because he lived in a large apartment setting with a lot of people in it. So that's just an example of how you might develop friends. Natural supports are family and friends and acquaintances, co-workers, volunteers, mentors, faith and other community members. Another person I volunteer with, his name is Dale, and Dale's 85 years old now, so I've been volunteering with him for a long time. But he was living in an intermediate care facility. The University of Minnesota assigned him a volunteer that was going to work with him for 8 weeks. And I thought, well, fantastic. That'll be a great 8 weeks. Every week he's going to go out and do something really fun. It's going to go to the movies. He'll go out to eat. It'll be just great. And so this 20-year-old volunteer did a great job because they not only volunteered with him, but they introduced him to her family. And when her volunteer period of 8 weeks was over, months after that, Dale was shopping at Target. And this volunteer friend's dad said, Dale, hi, Dale, is that you? Wow, it's so good to see you. It's been months. So happy to see you. We're going fishing today. We're going to take the boat out. Do you want to come along? And so that was a plus because Dale not only connected to the volunteer friend for 8 weeks, but connected to the family for other natural supports that lasted months beyond that. So by building networks, you could promote involvement in programs, activities, projects, volunteer experiences, and employment. Dale is a part of my life still. He calls me every day or maybe every other day, and we have a brief conversation. And he asks about my brother. He asks about my nieces and nephews. He visits the farm at least once a year. He actually came to my mom's funeral. The mom's funeral was at 10:30 in the morning, and he and his staff drove all the way from Minneapolis to get there. I couldn't believe it. I saw him in the back. I was just overwhelmed. And so those natural connections can be really a plus and really a benefit. All right, next slide, please. So, as you can see, so far, there's an array of housing options, and you have preferences to kind of where you're going to be, where you want to be. If you're interested in being in a housing option that's already set up, you just move in. That's provider controlled, where maybe the staff are hired directly, you don't have any involvement. You move into a house that they're going to prepare the meals, they're going to prepare the food, they're going to help you and your family establish the goals and objectives. That could be an option. Or with the other angle, if you want to live in a situation with your own home that you're more in control, it's person controlled, you have a choice of where you're going to live. You have a choice to live in an apartment or a house or buy a home or rent something, live with your friend, live with your significant other, and you have a choice of which provider you're going to have work with you. If you had a housemate, you could have two providers, one provider for your housemate and one provider for you. So if you wanted to go swimming and they wanted to go bowling, you could both do that activity. You wouldn't both have to go swimming or bowling. And this is all combination with supports and services that you pick and choose from the menu of home and community-based waivered services, or the menu of services through community first services and support. You put these together to create your preference for housing. We're going to go through some more specific examples of provider-controlled housing and person-controlled or own home arrangements and give you some more ideas. Next slide, please. So, so we have an idea of kind of the words we're using. Owning a home means, of course, that you bought the home, you have ownership over it. This is your home. Condominiums and co-ops is a community setting with others. The ownership is in place, is shared. You might have co-ownership or kind of collaborations. Rentals, you get to use the space for a period of time. Often you have a lease and you determine when they determine when that lease is up. You have an apartment or home in the community. And person-centered means that you're going to choose your roommate, the location, the service provider, and the number of services that you have. These are all housing options for your own home. You could live in a home you bought, you could live in a condominium, you could live in a rental, and it's all person-centered. You're arranging the services and supports for yourself. This wasn't always the case. Historically, the Department of Human Services in Minnesota only had an option to live in a home that was controlled and owned by a provider. I don't know how long ago, it seems maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, the state said we're going to unbundle services. So you have more choices where the services and the housing is separate in many cases. You can have services and housing together, and you can have it separately. In this case, it's separate. Okay, next one, please. So provider control, a little bit different. You choose from the provider's buildings and their packages of services. Often these are called community residential service. The older word for it is a group home, but a CRS or community residential service refers to adult corporate foster care or a waiver, home and community-based waiver group home. The housing settings include services while living in the same building with housemates that you probably didn't choose. They were either there or they're coming in the future. They might change where people move out. So it's even different than living in an apartment because you can't count that the housemates are going to be the consistent housemates. They might be there for a long time, but they might move out. It's their choice if they stay or they move out. Community residential setting. Often it's 1 to 4 adults, and it could be an exception of 5 where they share a home. They do have their own bedroom, but they're shared living spaces. A caregiver could live in the house, or it could be shift staff. If it's called adult foster care, if it's called family foster services, often somebody is living in the home. And if it's corporate foster care, then it's shift staff, where staff come and go according to their schedule. There are some options called board and lodges. They're not as popular and not as maybe appropriate for people with developmental disabilities that need more skill building and teaching, habilitative skills, but board and lodging do vary in size from 5 or more people living together. The bedrooms could be individual or shared. Building spaces can be shared as well. So these are some of the more formal provider controlled options that we have. Okay, next slide, please. Other continued, maybe not the most appropriate, but people do live in nursing homes or other long-term care facilities. Some of these facilities provide skilled nursing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's a continuum of services for people with disabilities, and so not everybody is independent and needs moderate services. Some people need more intensive care. So there's a waiver called CAC, C-A-C, Community Alternative Care, which designates that the person has hospital level of care. And so there are some smaller programs that are nursing level of care in the community for people that have nursing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They might have a home health aide. They might have a homemaker to clean the home. In addition, the meals are prepared. These are often situations where people have a feeding tube, they might have a respirator, they might have other more significant needs, and they're served in these long-term care facilities as well. There are places called intermediate care facilities for people with developmental disabilities. They are now smaller meaning less than 10 people or less in most cases. Historically, they've been very large. In the 70s and early 80s, we had Faribault Regional Treatment Center and Cambridge Regional Treatment Center, south of the cities and north of the cities, and there were thousands of people that lived there, and they were under the designation of intermediate care also. Then they downsized and came to the community, and in the early 90s, when I was an advocate at ARC, we had a few of those that were 100 beds or less, and Clarador, Lindley Hall were a couple of those, and we downsized those, and they became home and community-based homes, which were 4 people or less, and generally housed in the suburbs. Intermediate care facilities still exist. They're great places to live. They're a choice. Nursing is required as a part of the service, and a dietitian is required as a part of the service. In an intermediate care facility, the dietitian might indicate that you need 4 ounces of protein, a half a cup of starch, a half a cup of vegetables with your meal. There's a fire drill that must occur at least once a month. Sometimes they're in the middle of the night. Sometimes they're during the daytime. There's a lot of goals and objectives that people have to go through to live in an intermediate care facility. Assisted living is a newer option for developmental disabilities. It's been a classic or historic option for people with CADI, Community Alternatives for Disabled Inclusion, which is nursing home level of care, CADI level of care. Assisted living is a building, and it's an apartment building that has staff available 24/7. Often you have congregate dining together, and you kind of can choose additional services as you need them. So if you needed homemaking services, you could choose those and pay a little bit more. If you needed nursing to administer your medication, you could choose those. If you needed help taking a bath, you could choose that in addition. And the staff are in the building, so you're going to get checked on your wellness regularly, daily as well. So those are some additional options for people with disabilities related to housing. Okay, next slide, please. Housing reflects all these things. Think of all the choices we've talked about. Can you afford this place you're going to live in? Is it on Lake Minnetonka or is it in New Hope? Is it something you like with an exclamation mark at the end of it? Does it have the services you need? Often people are looking for nursing care and nursing support, and sometimes it's not the level that they need. The nursing aren't there at the level that they need, so you have to keep looking for other options. Is it physically accessible to you, and it doesn't have barriers related to your physical condition? Dale, my friend that's 85 years old, moved this year from one intermediate care facility he's lived at since the 80s to another one, which was accessible. He just walks in the door, there's no steps, and he walks right to his room. And so it's going to be a lot easier for him to get around. In the home he had before, he didn't have a lot of steps, but he had 3 steps to get into his apartment from the main area, and now he doesn't have that. And so he moved to a place that he's happier with. He tells me he's happy and he likes it there. So we're all pleased about that. Is it in a city that you like to live in? Maybe that you know. Is it a city you're comfortable with? Maybe it was a place you grew up as a child and you know the stores and the owners in the neighborhood. And maybe if you moved to a new place, a new environment, you wouldn't be as comfortable. So these are all things you want to think about as you're reflecting on housing and thinking about where you want to go. All right, next slide, please. We want to create a vision. These are the tools we have. We have choice and opportunities and supports and services. We have money available. We have to find out where the money comes from. Is it from the federal government? Is it from the state of Minnesota? Is it from the county? Often it's from the federal government and the state of Minnesota together. We want to share our stories. I always want to talk to people who've been there before, who went over the bumps before, so I don't have to go over the bump. So if you have a child that's 18, you want to find parents of 21, 22, 23-year-olds. So you can talk to them and say, what did you do when your child graduated from high school and went to transition program? And what did you do when you found a place to live for your son? Tell me about that. Tell me what provider you used. Tell me if it was what the process was. Where do you start? Where's that format? So sharing your stories is important for many, many reasons, to learn from people who have been there before, but also to share it with legislators who are going to provide the funding for you as well, because often legislators may not have the same experiences that you do. We're lucky in Minnesota, we do have a lot of choices versus some other states. And because of that, we have a lot of people moving to Minnesota to use some of the services that we have available. Next slide, please. So we have public benefits, services and support and funding. A lot of the journey is learning what those benefits are, because you learn them once and then they evolve, they change, the word changes. So we had personal care attendant services for years and years. That was the name, PCA, personal care attendant services. In October of last year, that changed to Community First Services and Support. And it became a new service that was self-directed, which means you're the boss. You get to hire the staff. You have a federal and state tax ID number, a workers' compensation number. You use an agency called a financial management service. And so if you're not paying attention, you'll miss that change. And so be aware of the services and the supports and the funding available, and be aware that they evolve and change so you're prepared when you need it, when your son or daughter is available. Some of the services and supports, the vast majority, are paid through medical assistance. Medical assistance has um, a manual that I saw one time. It's 600 pages long, and it describes all the things that medical assistance pays for. So it's very comprehensive. Most of the things we talked about tonight so far are paid through medical assistance. The staffing, the medical supports, the transportation, the day program, the vocational supports are all paid through medical assistance. And in addition, waivers. Waiver means to waive the rules of living in a nursing home, a hospital, or a intermediate care facility. To choose to live with mom and dad or live on your own. So we're waiving the rules of medical assistance and living in the community. There's different types of waivers for people with nursing home level of care, hospital level of care, people who have acquired brain injury, as well as people with developmental disabilities and related conditions. Some of the services are funded through Hennepin County. Depending on where you are in Minnesota, you might have a county that has more resources or less resources. If they have adequate resources, then they can be creative and they can allow some funding that's county paid that will fill in some of the gaps they have that are unmet in other areas. Hennepin County, as an example, has a work program for people that aren't open to the waiver called It's Working. It's self-directed. It allows people to be creative and be the manager of their services. And as a result, even though we're talking about housing tonight, we've had some successes with a person who wants to be a disc jockey, a DJ for music. And he's gotten so busy, he's being mentored by the gentleman who is the DJ for the Minnesota Twins and the Leaks. And so lots of county services, depending on the county you live in, you want to ask them if they have county funded services as well. These services and supports pay for staffing, people that support you to learn about bathing, dressing, grooming, to learn about cooking, cleaning, transportation, living on your own, and other funding available on the other side of the slide. Social Security comes in Social Security or RSDI, Retirement Survival Disability Insurance, state financial assistance and county disability programs. We're going to learn about that. That funding can pay for things like food support or help with rent assistance and help with other things that you need to create housing. So we'll be talking more specifically about that tonight and in much more detail in the second session with John from the state of Minnesota. All right, next slide, please. Well, look at here. This is a story about myself, and it's a recent story. It's happening right now. I'm speaking from the house you see in the middle of the picture, and I'm speaking from the farm you see with the vast rolling hills over the Des Moines River. And the gentleman you see there is Brian, and Brian moved to the family farm August of last year. So I talked with you and I mentioned I volunteer with 3 people. Brian was one of the people that I volunteered with for over 20 years. Brian has a brain injury. And Brian used to live in that really beautiful apartment that you see on the left side. And that sounds, it was really a great place to live for many, many years. And then it's hard to live in an apartment because, Brian decided he was going to take electric guitar lessons. And people just didn't appreciate the fact that he was practicing electric guitar, even though it was the afternoon. And sometimes he decided he was going to practice electric guitar up till 10 o'clock at night, since that was the rule. And so you get knocks on his door, you get knocks on the wall, you get visits from his landlord here and there. And other little things that are challenging about living in an apartment setting where he liked electric control cars, and where was he going to go? So he would run them in the parking lot, and the management would say, you can't use electric control cars in the parking lot. It's dangerous. And on and on and on, different things happened where sometimes the apartment management would promise to fix things, and then 10 years later it wasn't fixed, or because he was wearing a karate uniform or a taekwondo uniform in the hallway, some person came by and said, "Would you like to fight?" On and on and on. And each of these things, sometimes he would get written up to the point where he was going to be asked to leave. And so I will be retiring March 31st of this year, coming up. It's pretty close. And so my vision for him was to have a plan B, because he didn't have a plan B. If he was going to get kicked out, he wouldn't have a place to live. So I sped up my plan and I built this house on the family Century Farm, which I'm presenting from right now. And we rented a U-Haul. And Brian's here right now. He's adjusting. People ask him, "How do you like living here?" He said, "Well, it's a lot different than the city." And it is truly different than the city. But he's adopted some of our 10 cats that we have. They're farm cats. He's found new interests with bow and arrows and getting outdoors and fishing and hunting and things like that as well. He can still ride his bike. Unfortunately, he got into an accident with a car at a stop sign, and he won a settlement, and he was able to purchase this very beautiful side-by-side vehicle you see on the right, and he can run up and down the hills on the farm with it. So the pros and cons for him are basically that he's living in a place that he hasn't experienced before. He's got space. He can play his guitar all day and at night if he wants to, because he has his own little shed, his guitar shed, which is outside of the house. He kind of set that up ahead of time. He's developing new relationships as well. So the next slide is going to refer a little bit about how he gets by here, what kind of supports he has in place. And we'll have a few examples. Okay, next, there we go. So Brian has Social Security. He earns $885 a month. And he has something called Minnesota Supplemental Aid, which is about $100 a month. He has Minnesota Supplemental Housing Assistance, which we can apply for, which is around $400 a month. So together, he has around $1,400 a month. He can pay for rent and food and other kind of things. He gets around $200 some a month for food support. The rent here is $465. It's relatively reasonable, so he can afford to live here. He has Consumer Directed Community Support, CDCS. And CDCS is a service of the waiver, although it seems like it's its own country, but it's a service of the waiver, very different. It's self-directed, where he is the employer of his staff. So he decides who his staff will be. He decides the rate of pay for the staff within a range starting at $20 an hour. He determines the staff schedule with support. So I help him put his services and supports together. I take him to medical appointments. I take him out to eat. I teach him cooking skills, those kinds of things. I help him manage things. I take him to the cities once a week because he has guitar lessons at Guitar Center in Maple Grove, and he started piano lessons also. And because he's got a few guitars and a couple pianos, he likes to collect things. And so that's him, and that's where he is right now, and some of the supports that he has in place. We have a couple more examples coming up. He's in his own home, even though he's renting. This is his own home. It's not a licensed setting, it's his own home. Okay, next slide. Then we have Leslie and Kara. Leslie and Kara are really good friends. And when they were looking for housing, they decided they wanted to live together. And so they moved into a licensed home called a community residential setting, or traditionally a group home paid through home and community-based waiver services. And they like to share a lot of their activities together. They like to cook together. They're just very comfortable with each other. And the nice part about finding a housemate to move in together is that when we talked about what's the long-term plan, as long as you want to be housemates or roommates, you can be housemates or roommates. And most likely in this situation, they'll be housemates or roommates for a very long time. Nobody's going to kind of leave in the middle of the night or not tell somebody they're going to leave. They're going to be involved for a long time. So you can do that to make a connection. Next slide, please. We'll go through some of the financial information. So their funding is a little bit different. They have Social Security, or one person has Social Security, and they're using something called housing support, which is different than Minnesota supplemental aid. Minnesota supplemental aid is typically provided in a non-licensed setting. Housing support is typically provided in a licensed setting. When Brian gets Minnesota supplemental aid, he gets money on his electronics benefits card once a month, and he can go to an automatic teller machine and take it off twice without any fee. After that, there's a fee. When Leslie and Kara get money for housing support, the money goes directly to their waiver provider. They don't get to see the check. It goes directly to the waiver provider to pay for their food, 3 meals a day, to pay for heat in the group home, to pay for the toiletries, to pay for the sheets, those kinds of things. There's a total amount that the state will provide, which does change every year, so you have to kind of pay attention to it. It usually goes up, not down. But the total amount is around $1,135. So if a person's Social Security is $942, the state will add to the pot, in this case, $192, to total $1,135. At the end of the month, Leslie and Kara each get $125 for personal needs money to pay for toothpaste, to pay for going out to eat, to pay for other things. And that's not a lot of money for that. And in a way, it's kind of a disincentive. So any expenses not covered by the provider might be covered by the family or certain trusts or ABLE accounts that might be invested in for their future. The supports for staffing are paid through the Developmental Disabilities Waiver, and they also have customized employment and day services, and natural supports from families and friends. So the provider, their waiver provider, gets $1,135 a month to pay for their rent and their food, and then they get additional funds to provide staffing for them. In this case, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's kind of a plan of care, and then they each get $125. And again, that money goes right to the provider. It doesn't go to Leslie or Kara. Next one, please. Okay, Darius and life sharing. Life sharing is a relatively new concept within the last 5 years about having spending a lot of time initially upfront matching the foster family with the person. And so we spend a lot of time up front with that matching process so that match is something that lasts a longer time and each person is comfortable with the other person. Next slide, please. So Darius is funding. He has Social Security at $943. He has a job, $213. The state adds $317 to make up for that $1,135, which does, again, change every year. This is an example, just to kind of compare two things to give you an idea of where that might fall. This amount includes rent, utilities, and food. At the end of the month, Darius gets $125. He has waivered services, home and community-based waivered services, um, which and that pays for the staff support that he has. And there's natural supports. The family and the friends can also help and assist with life sharing. The way the house parents are paid, the total amount available is 60% to the life sharing provider and 40% to the life sharing agency. So 60% to the parents that live there that help and assist, and 40% to the agency. So a new option, and it's flexible for a lot of people. They spend a lot of time with the matching portion. Next slide, please. And we have folks for that have community alternative care or hospital level of care needs that have um, respirators, that have feeding tubes, that need pulmonation, that need a lot of extra care and assistance. And there are few, but they're still available, different types of nursing support homes in the community. I've seen them as a non-licensed setting with nursing supports, and I've seen them as a licensed setting with nursing supports. I've seen them have maybe relatives, like a brother or a sister, live in a part of the house as a natural support, in addition to paid supports. And I've seen it be all paid supports. But a common example or a common link is that nursing is a part of the plan up to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or as needed. It could have home health aides administering maybe medications in addition to the nurses. It could have a homemaker that would be cleaning and providing some meals in addition to that as well. Generally, this would be for 4 people or less living in a licensed setting, or a non-licensed setting. It would probably be less than that. The goal is to have smaller groups of people live in a non-licensed setting, like 1 or 2. You can, when you're looking for services, there's a website called Minnesota, what is it? MinnesotaHelp.info. Spell out Minnesota, www.minnesotahelp.info. You could put the type of service you're looking in there. Maybe it's community integrated supports, or community first services and supports, or a live-in caregiver, and the city or the county that you're living in, and the list of providers that offer that service will come up. And so that's one of the ways to find the providers you're looking for with all the services that we're talking about. To meet that question, how will you afford the staff support necessary? You look at the type of staff support you're looking for, and then choose it from there. All right, next slide, please. So Elena's financial situation, it's her Social Security is $943. The state contributes $317 to make that maximum total amount. In her case, she has a couple different benefits. She gets a free cell phone through Assurance Wireless. There's different options for people that get services through the county to access free cell phones. And so a pro is that your cell phone is free. A con is that only one person in one address can have that cell phone, can have a cell phone like that. And so if you're living in a group setting, only one person in the group setting can have the free cell phone. You get a cell phone, you can get unlimited minutes, you can get unlimited texts. There's several providers in addition to Assurance Wireless that can do that. Um, Once you have a cell phone for a year, they will send you a text that say, are you still on Social Security? Do you still receive housing support? And you answer yes to those questions. And the cell phone continues to be funded for the rest of the year. Because Elena has PAC level of care or hospital level of care, her waiver funding is very expensive. It's up $350,000 a year or more to pay for nursing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then it's supplemented with home health aides and homemakers. So it wouldn't be her alone, it'd be another person or up to 4 people in a housing situation. So these are less often. We see them in the community less often, but they are available for higher need folks. All right, next slide, please. All right, we're a little bit early, but that gives us more time for questions, or I can expand upon some areas. And I was always nervous because I talk a lot that I'm spending too much time on things. So I'm glad that we are a little bit early. So that's good. I'll let Sue take over for a little bit.
Thank you, Jerry. Just a reminder that we have 2 more workshops coming up. The workshop a week from today, we're going to really drill down into waivers and also public housing supports as well. So tonight's session was meant to be more of a broad and general introduction to housing. And then really excited for our session on the 17th. We're going to be hearing from families and young adults, their stories about how they navigated housing services, supports, and funding to create their own vision of housing. But Jerry, we have questions.
Hey, I like questions.
I know, so let's get to them.
Are they
First
easy
one,
questions or hard questions?
for you, Jerry, they're going to be easy.
Okay, we'll see.
I thought Minnesota was not allowing parents to go together and buy a place and staff it. Did something change in the last few years?
We can still do that. I don't think anything changed. The state doesn't want programs that are not licensed to look like group homes. So if you Google Minnesota Department of Human Services, own home, look at the requirements for own home. They talk about that each person should have their own person-centered plan. They'd like to have 1 or 2 people be in a house versus more, 4, because then it looks more like a group home. The crafting, it's not so much buying a home together, it's about what it looks like. That each person might have their own provider. I mentioned earlier that somebody might want to go swimming, the other person might want to go bowling. If you had your own provider, that can happen. And so the state really wants those things to happen versus traditional community residential settings where everybody has to do one thing because we have one staff and one van and 4 people. So there's a little bit about that. It doesn't matter so much who owns the home. It matters what the program looks like within the building itself. So there still is an option to own a home, even if it's parents. There's levels of legal stuff. You have to have a contract with each of the parents. They have to have a relationship. Some people develop limited liability corporations. Some people just have a gentleman's agreement. To protect yourself and to protect the people living there, just common sense kinds of things you want to put in place. With own home, we have an example checklist because it's not an expectation of who's going to do what. Who's going to mow the lawn? I don't know. Who's going to mow the lawn? Is it going to be the staff? Is it going to be me because I really like mowing the lawn and I live there? Is it going to be a company I can hire through chore services? Who's going to pick up the medication? I don't know who's going to pick it up. Is it mom because mom's always done that? Is it the staff because they're hired to do that? Is it me because I like going to Walgreens because there's things I like to look at, So we have an example checklist to kind of fill out, and then people decide who's going to do what in an own home situation. versus a community residential setting where it's understood that the provider does most things like go shopping and make the meals and make the goals and hire the staff. So
Okay, excellent. Question number 2. Integrated community support, is that meant to be long-term or just for training purposes?
I would say it's meant to be long term, although people in the continuum of life, when I moved to Minneapolis in I want to say when I moved in the 80s, late 80s, I've moved 7 times, right? And I ended up in New Hope. And so now I'm on the farm. And so it's not to say people won't be in the same place for a long time, but often people's goals change and their life changes and they might want to, have a different housemate or have a significant other or whatever. So you can live there as long as you want. There's no predetermined amount of time you can live there. But it's meant to be kind of a stepping stone between living in a community residential setting, a group home, and living in your own home. It is a place where staff are present in the building. You determine how much your assessed need will be based on something called the MnChoices assessment. Um, and you kind of get what you need. Yeah, okay, I'll stop there.
Okay. Have you seen good models for people to age in place?
Age in place, sure. I think anytime you can own a home or rent a home long term that's accessible, that has a ramp to your house and has a laundry on one floor and the bathroom on one floor, those are good places to be. Um, some of our providers are merging elderly populations in apartment settings with people with disabilities, and and that interaction can be really good where they might have a game like a scavenger hunt and they ask the elderly which ones want to participate in this event. And so relationships are developed. Sometimes the people with disabilities will do tasks like take the garbage out for the elderly folks, and then the elderly folks will make cookies for the other folks. And there's this kind of relationship between the two. So those are some ways that people could live together long term. I think, ultimately, um, living in your own home would be a plus, but that's just kind of my bias, I think.
Okay. Eligibility for this array depends on being deemed disabled via state of Minnesota or the feds and therefore qualifying for waiver services.
That's true, but you can duplicate similar situations with private pay or with PCA or community first services and support, which is not waivered services. And you can just duplicate some things. So maybe there are 4 people with disabilities that want to live in a home together. And maybe there's a college student that's okay with providing support for the 4 individuals. And maybe they don't have formal services, but maybe the parents are able or willing to pay to share the rent so that the live-in caregiver doesn't have to pay any rent. And maybe they're using the PCA, which is now Community First Services and Support, flexibly as a group, and that staff ends up having a full-time position because they're sharing the services with the 4 people. Maybe he works with one person from 8 to 9, the next one from 9 to 10, the next one from 10 to 12, just something like that. But there are ways, again, so many people need housing. We want to talk to people individually about where do you want to live? What's your vision? And then talking about how to afford rent and food and how to afford the staff support necessary, whether that be formal traditional licensed services or home and community-based waiver services, or something we just create with family and natural supports as well. Rumi in Minnesota is one program that has changed the way we think. Rumi advertised on city buses. Typically, we don't advertise disability services on city buses, and this wasn't particularly a disability service, but it was matching people that needed something with people that wanted something. And so maybe in a situation where I needed a roommate and wasn't really fussy about who that roommate would be. It didn't have to be a friend of mine. Maybe a person with a disability or even a homeless person needed a place to live and there was a match. Or maybe I'm an elderly person that owns a home and I just need help getting the sugar off the top shelf. And so there's a match. I'm going to help you out. Or some of those situations we talked about where elderly and people with disabilities are living in the same apartment building. There's pros and cons. I might walk your dog and then you're going to, pay me $5 or pay me nothing and give me cookies or just spend time with me and tell me stories about growing up in the 30s and 40s. I don't know. There's lots of creative options for people to put non-traditional housing together as well. Think of Indu, the story I gave. She bought a condo. It doesn't mean that we all need to buy a condo, but maybe we rent spaces and we find friends in a neighborhood. And that's what she did. She just had a vision, and her friends from work got together and bought property in the neighborhood to support her children. And then it just kind of grew from there. So it wouldn't have to be paid waivered services. It could be natural supports as well. Just kind of putting something together, taking a village and making it work.
When using your own home options, does a waiver ever cover or help cover rent?
Waiver does, well, that's a tricky answer. So officially, the waiver does not cover rent, but there's a service called Caregiver Living Expenses through the Minnesota Home and Community-Based Waiver that will pay for it, the live-in person's share of rent and food. So we're typically officially not paying for rent, we're paying for the service of caregiver living expenses, but we are paying for rent. So yeah, it the waiver is really for staffing. The waiver is for staffing and staff support, not for rent. But if you had a living caregiver, you could augment your rent a little bit by using that service.
Okay, sorry, I was looking up an answer for someone. Is there an age limit on assisted living, Jerry?
Tough
And I don't
question.
know if that means, I don't know which direction, like, can you be
Well, for
18
sure,
and
it's
use
18.
assisted living
Yeah, it'd
or?
have to be 18, because placing children, we have the Family Preservation Act, and there's all kinds of things that we need to, processes we need to go through to place children in any situation out of the home. So it would have to be 18 years old. And I'm thinking in most cases, there's not a limit, but when you're 65, you make an informed choice of continuing on. Hopefully, you make an informed choice of continuing on the long-term care waiver you're on or moving to the elderly waiver or the alternative care program. The elderly waiver and alternative care program are funded differently, so you may not be able to afford the level of care in assisted living, or you may be able to, I don't know. They tend to be less robust in their funding. So
Okay. Are there similar guides, resources available in other states similar to the HB 101 Minnesota guide?
there are. Berkeley College in California develops a website for every state. So in the information we presented, there was a tagline for Minnesota. If you just go to HB 101, I bet you'll find many states and you click on your state. I haven't done it recently, but I did it a while ago.
Okay, I'd also like to let people know, and I'm going to put the link in here as well. You can reach out to your Center for Independent Living. And Centers for Independent Living support people with disabilities to access their communities, lots of different services staffed by people who live with disabilities. So just an amazing resource. And housing supports with housing is one of their core services. So I will post that link there. Is it possible to get 24/7 nursing care in your own home that you own, or does that have to be a group setting?
It is possible because it's the service itself is licensed, but the home is non-licensed, so it is possible. Um, is it common? No, it's hard to find nursing 24/7. And so if you have a relationship with somebody and can help them be recruited by the nursing agency, that can be helpful. We didn't talk about consumer directed community support yet at all. That's a non-licensed, self-directed service. Um, and so that offers some flexibility as well. So it could be an option. Yes, it's not very common.
Okay. If a young adult with autism is under guardianship or a supported decision-making agreement, can they still qualify for housing and public benefits on their own?
Yes, they still can qualify depending on what their legal status is. If they're have a guardian and the guardian is over contracts, then the guardian would have to sign off on the lease and some other things in order to make that happen. The idea when you have an assessment or a min-choices assessment in Minnesota is that the person's able to make an informed choice either by themselves or informed choice with the input from their supported decision makers. So um, being your own guardian indicates you can make an informed choice. Having a guardian indicates that you need help and assistance to make that informed choice.
Okay. For Cara and Leslie, are they independent to do all their own cooking and buying groceries out in the community?
Um, They look pretty independent, which is a common situation for many people with disabilities, but they need more help and assistance than they appear. So a staff does go and shop with them because they're not necessarily buying healthy kinds of foods or planning ahead for meats and vegetables and those kinds of things. You know, it's kind of like the shiny object syndrome. I've got some money and I want to buy it off the shelf now. Oh, shoot, it's all full of popcorn and snacks, and I need some, some chicken for tomorrow. So they need, yeah, they have some support. That's why they're in that level of care. Community residential setting isn't for generally everyone. It's for people that might need a little bit more help. Although it's, assessed and they might not need 24-hour care. Based on the assessment, in this case, they do have 24-hour care.
Jerry, sometimes I need some help in the grocery store to not buy 4 bags of chocolate chips and maybe just one.
Yes. We all do that. Yes, you should see my counter I'm looking at right now. It has some Reese's Pieces and some other things on it. So
Okay, let's see. So as a parent, can I contact PRG to be me and my 18-year-old granddaughter to be our personal guide and my 18-and-a-half-year-old to make a living plan away from me?
well, PRG is a housing advocacy organization for owning property and owning a home. So if your vision is they're going to own a home, they're a really good organization to talk to and to go through the 8 to 9 hour home stretch training where volunteers will present this is what an assessment is, this is what a mortgage looks like, this is the process to buy a home. They would look at your credit rating. They would introduce you to a bank, a person at a bank, and help you through that process. If you're talking about person-centered planning, no, that's not really what they do. They really focus on home ownership and educating you. I learned so much about home ownership during that process, educating you about home ownership and how much of a home you can buy based on your income and based on your credit rating. The board
Okay.
of directors and the staff are listed on their website. You can even call them and leave a message tonight and they'll give you a call back. So I'm receiving no money for this endorsement.
Does owning a home affect your SSI?
It doesn't. In Minnesota, you can own a home and you can own a moderate car, and it doesn't affect your SSI. You can own a pretty significantly priced home and a moderate car. So there are exemptions.
Okay. In the life sharing option, can the foster family be a relative?
Generally not. Um, there's other ways the relatives could support the person by being a staff person and getting those hours that way and charging rent. And so it's not that they could never do that, but in a life sharing option, it is basically family foster care, and I'm not sure that they could be related. but I could certainly talk to you about how to make it happen with a relative in another way.
Okay. So I just want to let folks know that it's 10 after 8. Jerry and I can keep going for maybe another 15 minutes. Jamie, does that work with your schedule for tonight?
Sure, I will be on.
Okay. So sometimes the girls have a group of 3 to 4 friends that would all like to be together. Why would the state want to restrict that?
The waiver, the home and community-based waiver has size and setting rules. It's not that the state is restricting it, but they are looking at not going back into a historical situation where we had institutional models and large groups of people living together. They're seeing that you like to live in smaller groups, like our own space, like to have privacy, like to do what we want to do. And so they're trying to maybe model that. The defense would be if you have more than 2 people or 3 people, is that your person-centered plan reflects each other's wishes. So if you look at Own Home, it talks about the person-centered plan. So if you say, my person-centered plan is I want to live with this person, George or whatever, and George's plan says, yeah, I want to live with Jerry. And so that would be kind of a way to kind of advocate for more people living together. Not that you don't want to do that, but I don't
Okay.
know if I answered your question or not, but it's hard sometimes dealing with policy from a state agency and then working directly with families and trying to translate what the state's trying to do
Mhm.
and what the family wants. And part of my job for years and years and years was to listen carefully to that and to try and make it happen however we could in a different way. So the question about, can my relatives be life sharing? It's like, well, I mean, they could do it in another way too. They could be paid hourly. They could get rent through Social Security. They could get MSA housing assistance. There's another way to do it too, not just one way.
Okay, Jerry, the question of the evening. What happens if the president takes away Social Security?
Hmm. I think we need to all be really diligent about telling our stories to the state and federal legislature right now. Prepare those stories and have them ready and available, write letters and be as actively engaged in learning about what's happening as we can. Um, those are ways that we can exert our power uh, and our influence. And it's not something I would usually say as a county staff person, but I am retiring in about a couple weeks, so.
Um, I agree, Jerry, I agree. I think it's about stories and sharing your stories. And sometimes the people who make decisions don't have family members with disabilities,
Mhm.
and aren't walking a similar road. And so being able
Right,
to share
right. And
with
talk about
those folks
cost
is important.
effectiveness. Talk about the home and community-based waiver was established because it's less expensive than living in a hospital, living in a nursing home, living in a intermediate care facility. And talking about how Social Security is cost effective too. Brian is living in on a farm in southern Minnesota, doing his thing, being very happy, and it's not costing the state of Minnesota much. But if he lived in a group home because he has some challenges and some extreme medical conditions, he'd be $300 or more a day.
Okay, moving on. Our 18-year-old son will need close supervision at some point as mom and dad age. He has Down syndrome and autism. We would like a family-like or group home setting. I've been finding that all group homes are full. Do you think the state of Minnesota will allow for more group homes soon? Needs are increasing, not decreasing, and has there been talk at the state level as to how to address staff shortages?
There's a lot of questions in there. One of the ways that the state and actually providers, not so much the state, but providers are trying to address staff shortages are instead of having staff work as assigned in one program in a company, they are cross-training so they're able to work in several programs. That's one. Another thing they're doing is geographically locating programs nearer each other so there's more economy of scale or cost effectiveness in distance. You know, if you had 7 apartments in a building, one staff could work in there and then eventually have a full-time job by going from apartment to apartment. Is the state talking about expanding community residential settings? Not to my knowledge now. Still right now, we have to get 16 denials, 16 no's from providers that say we can't serve the person or we can't serve the person in order to open up a new development because of the moratorium on corporate foster care. So today it's still a challenge. Again, I really want to have a conversation with the person individually and talk about your loved one and what your vision for housing is and how we can make that happen more individually. You know, what's out there that would work for the person to make it happen. It's like a puzzle. You're kind of putting the pieces together. You have some of the parts of the puzzle. I've got some of the parts of the puzzle. And we work together and have a conversation and try and put it together and make it work.
Okay. Someone is looking for resources on who could help them develop a person-centered plan.
I can send Sue a state directory of providers that are certified in person-centered planning. So maybe she can send it out to people, or we can get your email address. We can send it out to you directly, unless the group wants it. The Institute on Community Integration, University of Minnesota Institute on Community Integration, is another resource for a list of people that are certified in person-centered planning, since they do a lot of the training as well.
Okay. RSDI of $1,800 a month. Does that reduce some of the assistance?
Would you might not qualify because you're already over the asset limit that MSA and MSA housing assistance would have provided you. So you're not in a bad spot. You're in a good spot. You're kind of at where other people would have been with the assistance. So you could use that money. And with a housemate or with a live-in caregiver, you can secure a place that's a little bit nicer, a 2-bedroom or kind of a nicer place that you can live. Assuming that's what you want, unless you want a house.
Okay. What is the quote state ads support called when state helps meet licensed home meal cost? I saw MSA and housing support, but sometimes it just said state ads. That would be for the stories.
Sure. The funding is housing support. It used to be called Group Residential Housing, or GRH funding. That money, which was quoted tonight at about $1,100 and some dollars, changes every year. It usually goes up a bit. If I have no income at all and I moved into a residential setting, the state would provide 100%. They would fill that pot full of $1,100 and some cents, and I would get $125 in addition for my personal needs money. If I had Social Security at $800 and some dollars a month, the state would pay the difference between $800 and some dollars a month and the total amount, 1,100 and something. And so the state would invest less, but it would still be that total amount.
Okay. My son is on the spectrum and is a junior in high school. How do I know if he will qualify for housing after a transition program?
It's not so much qualifying for housing, it's qualifying for the staff support through home and community-based waiver, if that's what you're looking for, or community first services and support. So why doesn't everyone in Minnesota have home and community-based waiver services? Because it's a higher level of care, it's a higher level of need. It says that I need something beyond bathing, dressing, grooming. I need, respite, I need homemaker, I need home delivered meals, I need a living caregiver. If you're And through consumer-directed community support, it says, I need horseback riding therapy, art therapy, music therapy, prescribed special diet. If your son needs those kinds of things or is looking for those types of things, you would contact your local county and you would ask for something called the Min Choices Assessment. And they would determine what services the county offers that you do qualify for. They could give you a list of those services, and then you can check those out and learn more about them.
Do you know, Jerry, if there have been any development of increasing assisted living style facilities for younger adults with disabilities? Besides for those who are 55 and older?
Well, I think this new service, integrated community support, is not assisted living, but it looks very much like assisted living in that it's in an apartment setting, the provider controls the setting, you're getting staffing according to your needs for teaching, training. It's a little bit different in that meals are not provided, transportation is not provided, and nursing is not provided, but you can purchase those in addition. You can add personal care attendant services, you can add home delivered meals to it. So that might be serving a younger population. I'm not aware of development or additional assisted living. I know there's a lot of providers that are requesting, that are opening new programs, but I don't know what their population is. It's a pretty common service. Sometimes it's not seen as quality service. We've had some issues with the quality of services from parents and guardians in the past too. So,
Okay. For people living with serious mental illnesses, it appears that DHS's priority is to offer supportive housing to those who are homeless. It sounds like there's more choice and ample supply for folks under the DD waiver or the CAC waiver. Is that right?
I don't think so. I think the CADI waiver for community alternatives for disabled inclusion serves people with nursing home level of care, and you can have mental health issues and still qualify for the CADI waiver. If you have the DD waiver and your primary condition was mental health, you would not qualify. That's something that you wouldn't qualify for that. There are other services we didn't talk a lot about this time, but we're going to talk more about next time for mental health services. There are, I forget the name, there's kinds of group homes that are time limited that people would go to for mental health support for a period of time, and then they would sometimes go back home or go back to where they'd lived before. But we'll spend a little bit more time on that at the next session, talk about mental health services as part of the continuum.
What comes first, Jerry, the housing or the financing? Should the person find a good setting location and then look for funding?
I would say funding comes first because you don't want to be paying rent in an open apartment or house if you don't have the staff support necessary. Even before that, finding a housemate or roommate comes before funding. And so find the housemate, the roommate first, and then maybe you've already got funding, secure that, and then talk about where you want to live together in the future.
My child is 16. I noticed some of your comments were about moving after transition. Is there criteria for moving an individual earlier than around 21 years old? I'm hoping to have my child live elsewhere sooner than 21.
They can move at 18. It's typically they don't because they are in transition services through age 21 through the public school. So a lot of people are living with their parents or they may be going to a secondary or post-secondary education through Bethel Build or MICC or other program. But you could have a person be prepped and ready to move at 18 using the same idea, having them decide where they want to live, how will you afford rent and food, how will you afford the staff support necessary, and then you just have to plan a little bit earlier to do that.
So this came from someone who is anonymous. If you would like to send me an email, I can connect you with one of our special education advocates. I know enough about this to be dangerous, but there are some options if the young person is having mental health issues or behavioral. I don't like that phrase, behavioral issues.
Mhm.
But shoot me an email and I can get you connected with a special ed advocate who could do a better job of answering that question. All right, so if we did not get to your question, you have my email address, you have Jerry's email address, and if we have your name, we will get a list of questions and know which ones we didn't answer. I just want to be mindful of everybody's time. So if we didn't get to your question, send Jerry or I an email, or I will look at Jamie's report and see which questions we did not get to. And I'm sure we have your email address, so Jerry and I can answer your question that way. Jerry, lots of kudos, and I'm sorry, but you don't get to retire. So there.
Thank you. It seems more like fun than work, so um, I'm lucky
That's
to have a
good.
position where I enjoy it. So that's a good thing.
Okay. All right, everyone. Remember, next week we're drilling down into waivers, county and tribal services, and public housing and other financial supports.
A
So,
special guest, John, from the Department of Human Services. Will be
yes.
co-presenting. He's great. He's dynamic. He's got life experience with his own family and relatives, and he works at the state of Minnesota, so it's helpful.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the night.
Good
If
night.
there's nothing else, I will end tonight's Webinar. Thank you to our interpreters as well.
Yes, thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Night.